From having life-changing wet dreams to putting on too much Vaseline, here are some of the wildest excuses UFC fighters made for losing. Starting with Jake Paul's array of excuses. He's the latest in a line of fighters who can't take a loss gracefully. The young fighter had been taking it upon himself to choose the weakest opponents possible. Going after retired fighters from different fields is how he got his winning streak. After a couple years of getting tattoos and knocking out NBA players, Paul finally landed a real bout with none other than Tommy Fury. Maybe it was the devastation of his first loss, but the guy literally pulled all the stops to show that the loss wasn't his fault. The American said he suffered through an illness, then an arm injury, and the iconic jet lag prior to the bout. Since his excuses weren't excusing him, he went one step further. Logan revealed on his podcast Impulsive that Jake had a wet dream. It happened before the fight and probably had an impact on the result. He even claimed that the same thing happened to Logan before the KSI fight. Jake said he didn't want to talk about it, but said that he Googled the reason behind the dream. It's because of a testosterone buildup, and it makes your legs weak. He thinks it's one of the many reasons behind the loss, including the fact that he doesn't agree with the judges, and that his loss had nothing to do with Fury's talent and everything to do with his excuses.
Work there from Fury, but that's a nice short right hand from him.
Can you believe this fighter is trying to go up against Conor McGregor, who himself makes wonderful excuses? The Irish fighter is undoubtedly one of the most exciting fighters. He's the first to be championed in 2 different weight classes, and he also has trash talking in the bag. Because of this, there are many things to be said about him, good and bad.
Fantastic job of defending. Look at him spinning around. Khabib looking to complete the takedown, and he gets it.
With all his success, he fails to comprehend his losses. It's not always graceful when he comes out losing. After his fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov, he was ridiculed a ton by fans online. To this, he gave his famous statement that his foot was broken and swollen to the size of a balloon. This excuse is kinda strange because Khabib has had a clean record with no losses. Even the best of the best couldn't defeat him. So the post-loss trash talk was unnecessary and embarrassing. Speaking of embarrassing and unnecessary, Tito Ortiz's excuse was just that. Tito was one of the pioneers of the success of MMA, not just in a region, but the globe. So you can hate him or love him, but the facts remain the same. He's never been the one to shy away from speaking his mind, and that led to many surprising statements. One of the strangest was after his loss to Forrest Griffin. In the post-fight interview, he stated that he'd been in the brutal 3-round fight with, get this, a cracked skull. The excuse wasn't even needed because he actually gained a lot of respect despite a loss. His fight was just that impressive. But this behavior just didn't sit well in the eyes of the fans. Grace would have helped him earn more respect. Whatever the opposite of grace is, it's synonymous with Alistair Overeem's excuse. To be honest, this excuse came as a surprise because it came from a surprising man. It didn't help that it was one of the worst ones, too. Alistair wasn't too happy about his loss to Stipe Miocic, and that led to a rather humiliating excuse. I think it was the adrenaline of the loss, because in the post-fight interview, he said that Stipe had actually tapped out. When he had him in the guillotine choke, he felt his opponent give in. But he seemed to have forgotten a very important fact. UFC has access to the recordings and replays of every second of the fight and from all different angles. So the footage was replayed almost instantly, and it was made clear in front of thousands of people in person and those watching that no such thing happened. There wasn't any harm in admitting his loss to a great fighter, but the blatant false excuse just did not make sense.
Nice leg kick.
Caught the leg that time. Vanderlei came in quickly.
However, I've heard a worse excuse, like that of Rampage Jackson. He's one of those fighters who have a pretty interesting backstory. The way they succeed is just inspiring. What's not inspiring is when they can't handle defeat. and say something to tarnish their own reputation. He's an outspoken competitor with a good record. When he first made his way to the promotion, he lost a bout. His first bout ever, and it was against Kazuki Sakabara. An early loss is terrible and unfortunate, but Jackson took it way too far. He accused the promotion or his hotel of personally making sure that he can't compete well. He implied that his stomach was going through a different sort of hell. Even that still makes sense, but Mans was out here thinking he's been poisoned. Yes, poisoned from room service or something. That wasn't a very believable excuse. Those who blame the referee are even worse. What makes Rodrigo Nogueira's excuse so bad is that he is the one who messed up. He had the victory right in front of him. It's his judgment that led to a loss.
Kane's in big trouble.
Just missed the clinch. Lights it up one more time.
If he had continued to finish the fight with his fists, losing would be impossible. But he made the rash decision to win by submission. Instead of pounding Frank Mir, he tried to go down. And this attempt led to one of the most horrific injuries in UFC history. Mir wasn't about to submit, so he broke his arm when he twisted it the wrong way. He later said that this loss was because of the referee, who had apparently given poor instructions during the bout. Bro chose an L and couldn't live with it. This was still nothing compared to Karo Parisyan. It's one thing to be a confident douchebag in the UFC, that's kind of needed. It's part of the mental warfare, to make your opponent think you're better. But Parisyan wanted everyone to dislike him, and he did that all alone with his ego. His excuse was just laughable. He lost to Thiago Alves and decided that he was going to never accept it with grace. Even if that meant coming up with the first excuse off the top of his head, much like Jake Paul, he insisted that he lost because of his lack of care while training, implying that his loss was entirely his fault. His actual words were that he was too talented to train. It's surprising that anyone would make that comment in UFC, where training is required across the border for even the best of fighters. He was probably too talented to win the third of all the bouts he lost. Moving on, fighters always say that their opponent slipped away from them because of whatever reason, and that they'll get them next time. That's graceful.
Diana, your guy has done it! Are you kidding me right now?
But BJ Penn decided to add another layer to his excuse. It's such a bad excuse that it's one of the most famous ones in MMA history. The funniest part is that his excuse was taken very seriously. Official commissions were called upon, and there were investigations launched to verify if his excuse was valid. It wasn't. Penn was upset by how much Vaseline Georges St. Pierre had on, and claimed that his opponent was too slippery during the fight, which led to his loss. He added other excuses to it as well, but complaining about someone being slippery, genuinely slippery, was too much for the public. That's all on the wildest excuses UFC fighters have made after losing.